Welcome back to Football Daily, where today we're bringing you our top 10 football clubs which were heroically saved by their fans. 10. Leicester City. First up, we have the miracle makers of the Premier League. As everyone knows, Leicester City performed the great escape to avoid relegation from the English top flight back in 2015 before going one better and winning it the next season. But the Foxes could have been long extinct by this point had it not been for their fans, who helped bring the club back from the brink in 2002. Following a period in which Leicester had spent 6 consecutive years in the Premier League and won 2 League Cups under Martin O'Neill, they finished the 2001-2002 season bottom of the table and were relegated. If this wasn't bad enough news for Foxes fans, by October the club had been placed into administration, with a combination of relegation and a move to a new £37 million stadium proving fatal for the club's finances. But in the face of economic crisis, a group of dedicated Leicester supporters set up the Foxes Trust, aiming to advise the club's board and strengthen their ties with the community. The Trust had meetings with the two groups bidding for the club, and even spoke with the club's administrator, Deloitte, afterwards to give their own expertise on the matter. Within months, a bid was accepted from a consortium headed up by Leicester's most famous fan, Gary Lineker, and the club was saved. The rest, as they say, is history. 9. Swansea City. We hop across the border to Wales now, and one of the most successful stories of fan intervention in British football. Just a year before Leicester went into administration, Swansea faced their own financial problems. With the club on the rocks, it was sold for just £1 to Australian sports tycoon Tony Petty, who just so happened to have zero funds to invest in the club. It's fair to say Petty didn't make a good first impression, as within 2 weeks of taking over, he'd attempted to sack 7 players and told 8 others to accept a 70% pay cut, all the while selling the club's prize youngster Stuart Roberts for a fraction of his real value. Unsurprisingly, Petty quickly became hated by the Swansea faithful as the future of the club looked less and less certain. By the end of 2001, a group of Swans fans and businessmen had set up his own supporters trust to try and rein back control of the club and stop it going under altogether. After some heated negotiations, Petty gave in and handed control over to the consortium endorsed by the Trust and headed up by former board member Mel Nurse, reportedly just 24 hours before the club were due to go out of business. Within 3 years, the club moved from a new stadium, and by 2011 they gained promotion to the Premier League, just 8 seasons after they'd narrowly escaped relegation from the Football League altogether. As of 2017, the Swansea Supporters Trust still own 21% of their club, but their power has come under threat by the club's American takeover in 2016. 8. Panathinaikos. Next, we head over to Greece and the country's second most successful club ever. Panathinaikos are a well-known club to fans across European football, having been a regular fixture in the Champions League and reaching the semi-finals in 1996. They also have a long and distinguished domestic history with 20 league titles under their belt. But the Athens club have enjoyed less and less success in recent years as they've had to rebuild the club's financial setup. To go with the crippling economic problems faced by Greece in the aftermath of the global recession, Panathinaikos faced financial meltdown in 2011 and were forced to sell their prized assets, which included Djibril Cissé and Luis Garcia. Step forward Yanis Alfouzos, owner of the club Sky TV, who then devised a plan to hand over control of the club to the fans, and in 2012 he set up the Panathinaikos Alliance with the club's supporters and players. Just a few days later, Vardino Giannis handed over his shares to the Alliance, and as of 2016, nearly 8,000 Panathinaikos fans held a 15% stake in the club. 7. Real Oviedo. Now to one of the craziest football stories in recent years. Spanish club Real Oviedo were on the edge of oblivion back in 2012 when a remarkable campaign not only rescued them, but also brought them a global fan base. The Asturias club were once a mainstay of La Liga, but following relegation from the Spanish top flight in 2001, faced crisis after crisis after crisis. As Oviedo's president fell out with the city's mayor in 2003, the local government withdrew its support for the club and poured money into local rivals Astur instead, changing the club's kit to match Oviedo's and actually making plans to reclaim Real Stadium, What an absolute piss take. The fans reacted heroically, fundraising, protesting, and continuing to show up while the team played on awful pitches at tiny venues. Amid political and financial turmoil, the club was forced to sell its two most promising youngsters, Santi Cazorla and Juan Mata, and they sunk further into trouble over the following years as they were taken over and then dropped by tax criminal Alberto Gonzalez. Things came to a head in 2012 as the club seemed mere moments away from being dissolved, and when the board decided to make an open offer to the general public to buy shares in the club, it garnered an amazing response. Former players such as Cazorla, Mata and Michu helped promote the campaign on social media, and soon the club was gaining shareholders from Real Madrid's Florentino Perez to Carlos Slim, the richest man in the world at the time. But it was the fans who made the real difference, taking up as much as 40% of the shares on offer, and the club now has a following well beyond Spanish borders. 6. Portsmouth. Back to England now, and a club who, like Oviedo, had to bear years of financial turmoil. Portsmouth fans would have been forgiven for thinking their club was entering an era of huge success when they lifted the FA Cup in 2008, but little did they know their club was on the verge of collapse. Just over a year later, the club's money problems were so severe that some players were forced to play for free. And by March 2010, the club entered administration and were docked 9 points, dooming them for relegation from the Premier League with debts of 135 million squid. Less than 2 years after that, and following the arrest of Russian owner Vladimir Antonov, the club went into administration again, and a points deduction once more sent them down, and a consecutive relegation the next season saw them drop into League Two in 2013. But despite the club falling to its lowest position for over 30 years, changes were already afoot, as the Pompey Supporters Trust took inspiration from Leicester and Swansea to take over the running of the club. And after 18 months in charge, the club had cleared all of its debts. What an effort. 5. SV Austria Salzburg. Next up, we have a club who was swallowed up by corporate greed, but rose again in their original form. SV Austria Salzburg were first established back in 1933 and rose to prominence in the 90s, winning 3 Austrian Bundesligas, reaching the UEFA Cup final in 1994, and playing the likes of AC Milan and Ajax in the Champions League. But in 2005, the club's fans had to trade in their history and identity for the guarantee of investment and success, as energy drink giants Red Bull flew into town, changing the club's name, crest and colours, and turning them into Austria's dominant force. But some fans refused to swallow the bullshit from the blue and silver can, and instantly formed a new side bearing the club's original name. And in 2006, the all-new SV Austria Salzburg entered the 7th rung of the country's football ladder. By 2015, the club gained promotion to the Austrian second tier, making the dream of a future meeting with Red Bull very, very real. But unfortunately, Salzburg were relegated in 2016, so that pipe dream will have to wait a little longer. 4. AFC Wimbledon. One group of fans who have managed to turn dreams into reality are those of AFC Wimbledon. Wimbledon wrote one of the greatest stories in English football history in the 1980s, when their infamous Crazy Gang rose to the English top flight and beat Liverpool to win the FA Cup in 1988. But their supporters had to endure pain and humiliation just 14 years later. This was because Chairman Charles Coppell's plan to move the club 56 miles north to Milton Keynes was approved by the FA, and years of history and local support went to dust as Wimbledon became the MK Dons. But like in Salzburg, the reaction of the fans was instant, and within 2 months a new club was set up and had played its first friendly. By August, AFC Wimbledon were competing in the Combined Counties League, 9 divisions down from the Premier League. However, the club made a remarkable climb up the divisions and were promoted to League One in 2016. Less than a year later, they won their first ever home game against MK Dons, and the club was finally able to exorcise the demons of the past. 3. Maccabi Ironi Ashdod and Hapoel Ashdod. The stories of Salzburg and Wimbledon have evidently provided inspiration to football fans worldwide, as we can see with the case of Ashdod in Israel. While never scaling the heights of Israeli football, Maccabi Aroni Ashdod and Hapoel Ashdod battled for years as local rivals. But when both clubs faced financial difficulties in the late 1990s, fans of the two clubs had to suffer the worst fate imaginable in football. They had to support the same team. Ugh, the scenes. Yes, that's right. In 1999, Irony and Hapoel were merged to form FC Ashdod, and somehow the rivals had to become friends. The plan worked initially, as Ashdod reached third place in the Israeli Premier League and qualified for the UEFA Cup in 2005. But the good times would not last for too long. By 2015, relations between the club's management and the fans had become irreparable, as the club changed its name to Irony and then to Hapoel following some heated disputes. The supporters had had enough and set about re-establishing the original clubs and restarting the rivalry once and for all. 2. KSK Beveren. In 2010, Belgian side KSK Beveren suffered a similar fate to the Ashdod clubs when they were forced to merge with neighbours Red Star Waasland following financial meltdown. As Beveren's footballing activities were terminated, Red Star were allowed to move into their stadium and change the name to Waasland Beveren as a concession to angry Beveren fans. But understandably, this was not enough to appease supporters of the once great Belgian club. First of all, they launched a website to commemorate the history of their beloved KSK, with the aim of reforming the club once known as Little Anderlecht. And they succeeded! By the summer of 2011, the club was playing its first pre-season friendlies and had reclaimed its badge and colours, although the team had to settle for playing in neighbouring city, Sint-Niklaas. As a club run by supporters, Beveren has friendships with AFC Wimbledon and FC United of Manchester, and actually travelled to London to play Wimbledon back in 2010 for what would have been their first ever game. Unfortunately though, it was snowed off. 1. Hearts. Finally, we go to Edinburgh for one of the most heartwarming stories of recent football history, and yes, the pun was most definitely intended. Hearts of Midlothian, simply known as Hearts to most of us, are one of Scotland's most successful teams, and one of the few outside of the Old Firm rivalry to have won multiple league titles, although they are probably better than Rangers now. Dig. But during the 2000s, the club's financial situation had become a cause for concern. Despite getting decent results on the pitch, Hearts were being run into the ground off of it with crippling debts. Multi-millionaire Vladimir Romanov took over the club in 2004 in what became known as the Romanov Revolution, and the new owner set the ludicrous ambition of turning the club into Champions League winners. Needless to say, it didn't go to plan, and despite qualifying for the Champions League in the preliminaries in 2006, Hearts soon went downhill and economic problems returned to the club in 2011. Racking up debts of £25 million, the club were forced to enter administration 2 years later. Hearts were broken as the Tynecastle club started the 2013-14 season with minus 15 points, and unsurprisingly, they were eventually relegated. But by the start of the next season, the club had already taken positive steps, as non-profit organisation Foundation of Hearts joined forces with other supporters groups to save the club from oblivion. More than 8,000 fans joined the foundation to help local businesswoman Anne Budge take control of the club. By 2014, they are pledged to provide Hearts with £1.4 million a year for at least 2 seasons. But it gets better. In 2015, as a thank you to the fans, a well-deserved thank you, Hearts printed the names of every supporter who had pledged £120 or more on their new third kit. Isn't that just bloody lovely?
So we hope you enjoyed that, and if you want to check out more of our videos, then click here on screen. Don't forget to like and subscribe and get on our Snapchat and our Twitter.